Okay, here we go. Trying to record a little bit of director-writer commentary for Chapter 1 of Lifeblood. I've tried recording this several times now, and naturally, today my voice is totally shot from a concert I was at over the weekend, but we're gonna give it a try anyway. So, here we go. Wonderful original theme music composed by Octavian. Big shout out to him.
This is a bad idea.
That was probably true, seeing as if there was one
I'll start out by saying I do love that opening line of narration. If there's one thing I'm good for, it's a bad idea. That is a line that I have had rattling around in my head for, without exaggerating, probably 3 or 4 years now, and just couldn't find a project, to be a home for it until this one. Something that was the correct amount of glib and dry and sarcastic. That's actually what inspired me to write this project, was that I wanted to write a comedy, and all of the things that I was currently working on and had been sort of world building for were a little too serious. And I told myself that the next idea I had, I was gonna make it a comedy, and this is what became of that. Chris Rogers, who plays Hugo Matthews in this, the adult Hugo Matthews, that is, phenomenal work. I've worked with him on several projects. I've worked with him on a seminar production. I've worked with him on Records from the Reaver. We've each been in the A Walk with Ghosts series by Bone 13. So Christopher Z and Ray and Michelle play the young Hugo and young Jackie, respectively. And they each do a great job of bringing out that sort of bravado that pair of teenagers would have, two people who've known each other for a real long time, and give the younger voices, but still maintain the essence of the character that they saw kind of enveloping their scenes in the script. That's based on a real life experience. When I was in, I think it was middle school, a lot of my friends were reading The Hunger Games, and since I was in like the honors program or whatever, I had to read the Book Thief instead, which is significantly less fun to read than The Hunger Games. Oh, so there's a good example. There's a lot of name motifs in this, and I kind of tipped my hat to that a little bit by having Hugo's father, Ike, be into names and the meanings behind them, just as a bit of an Easter egg to people that if they're curious and they want to look up some of the various names of things in the town, of the evil corporation's name and their parent company, and even some of the names of the various characters, good guys and bad guys, a lot of them had a lot of thought, probably too much thought, associated with coming up with them.
Some fancy schmancy company had bought it up for their whatever it was operation they decided to set up right on the edge of Bright Ridge. But if they thought just by putting their center of operations up on the ass end of an already sleepy college
I know Chris said that he had a very hard time with breath control while he was narrating. That's a sentiment that Bone, who plays Elwood, also has shared with me, that my run-on sentences, while funny, have been the bane of various people's existences on this project, but I love my actors. I love that they're suffering through it to tell a good story, and hopefully the rest of the writing is fun enough to make up for the somewhat crazy number of what I've been referring to as monologue hells.
What happens if somebody comes by? They'd see you and you'd get caught, and then you wouldn't even be able to blame it on me, because I wouldn't be there for you to pin it on.
It's not pinning it on if it's true.
Whatever, come on.
Huey.
Shh, before somebody hears us.
It's another thing. I tried to do as much of the Foley as I could for this. I've never helmed a project before. I produced one short, like 15-minute thing as an inside joke among the cast of Apex Shadow, which was a lot of fun and actually was what kind of
Jesus.
kicked me in the ass and said, okay, give your own a shot. You can do this.
I hissed at her as she rammed into me from behind.
The entire community of voice actors and voiceover artists who I've worked with this past year have been incredibly skilled, welcoming, and warm. And it's really their talent and their enthusiasm that encouraged me to kind of bite the bullet, embrace a fear, and see if any of my stories that I write could stand having one more layer. Oh, I'm going to stop here in that little monologue. This is that first monologue that both Bone and also Ellis Bertrell, who plays the nervous assistant, they each have 2 short monologues that play off each other here. It's a lot of fun. They both had no idea what the hell they were saying, and I appreciate them immensely for going through with it. Yeah, so if it's not obvious from this series, these 2 monologues, I have some family members who are involved in pharma, who are in pharmaceutical sales, and it's just at this point such a cliche to have a pharma company be the straw man, evil incarnate villain, something like a Resident Evil or whatever. So we're this is my way of sort of letting the audience know pretty bluntly that that's not the direction that we're going to take it in this show. And Elwood even says it himself that there are some bad faith actors. There's nobody out here who's going to deny that. It's just sort of we're gonna switch things up and go a different route in this production. But this was a lot of fun to put together. That monologue specifically sort of set the tone for, yeah, at least one actor per episode is going to have to put up with a jargony, techno-babbly monologue. And so far, we're a few episodes in, and people have been turning in their audio on time, and everybody's been doing a great job. So, again, I want to thank the cast. They were, and continue to be, all-stars throughout this entire project. One interesting thing is that the timing of this story is such that it does make some of the Foley a little bit difficult. Initially, I thought I was going to be able to finish outlining and writing the scripts in time to still be in the winter months, but we actually ended up having a very mild winter. I don't think we even had to shovel. Yay, global warming. Not so much.
That was too close.
So yeah, it's a little bit weird writing about a blizzard while actively in like 80-degree weather, but plenty of authors have done it before, so I'm sure I'll manage. It's just kind of funny that it kind of goes to that anchoring heuristic where you get this idea in your head that, yeah, I'm definitely going to be able to finish this project in X number of weeks when... Oh god, that's so cute that you think you're going to be able to do that. Oh, right, so as I was saying... Gosh, what even was I saying? Guess it wasn't that important if I couldn't remember it. I'll say it if I think of it later. That line's a good example of a time that a actor delivered the line to me in a way I wasn't expecting, but I liked their performance. I liked the energy that Chris brought to that line, so I tried to be a little bit more laissez-faire as a director and trust that the merit of the story, that the comedy inherent in the script, and the fact that I trusted all of the actors, because for Chapter 1, I pretty much handpicked everybody. That's not saying that any of the actors who joined the production in Chapter 2 and onward are any lesser. They're absolutely phenomenal. And I'm happy to have brought them into my circle of acquaintances in the industry. Oh gosh, this end part was a bear to edit to get everything to sound, you know, like this mounting anxiety with the music and the various walla of the guards, intercut with a handful of hand-picked lines that I gave to 3 actors, Steve Nugan, Thomas Mergianas, and Charles Maddox. I hope I'm pronouncing any of those names correct. They did a great job. And here, that transition there with the bang, and then I woke up cutting to the morning songbirds was what was in my head when I decided to turn this story into an audio drama. I just thought there was an element of color and of life that I couldn't get across just in the writing. Andrew Poole, who's about to speak here. There we go. Ike Matthews. This is, I believe he told me his first project that he's been on as a voice actor, and I think he absolutely knocked it out of the park. I love the way that both bring some nuance and love to these characters. It makes them feel very lived in. It makes them feel familial, right? Which you'd hope a son and father would feel. That was something I felt very strongly about. I wanted the relationship between these two male characters to be good, to be healthy. Not saying there's not merit in when there's troubled parental relationships portrayed in fiction. I just felt like you really don't see two men who just love each other in a very healthy way in too much, at least of the current the line about the marriage honeymoon sex tape. I still can't believe some of the dumb jokes I put specifically in this first episode. I know some family members are going to be listening to this, and well, listen, guys, if you laughed at it, then we just won't tell anybody that I wrote it or that you laughed, so we'll call it even. Yeah, but I thought it was very important to have two guys in a family who loved each other. It's why I felt important about having them each say "I love you" to the other one at the end of this scene, which I'll probably point out again when it happens.
The only thing 7 a.m. was good for in my book was getting up to take a piss. Seeing that I wouldn't be much for conversation for the next few minutes, Dad plucked the remote off the armrest and turned on the TV.
All of the TV sound effects here. I just turned on the TV that I have in my room and recorded it with my Zoom. And then this is the first of a couple of Easter eggs where if you listen to some of the background stuff playing on the TVs and radios throughout the series, they're little excerpts that I got okayed from other project directors of projects that I've worked on, primarily as a voice actor. So that first one was the Bone 13 A Walk with Ghosts series, the one that Chris and I have both been in. It's headed up by the phenomenal actor who plays Frank Elwood. So you should absolutely check out his stuff. He is over at Bone 13, pretty much everywhere, but I know that is also the name of his production YouTube channel.
Sure do. Remember to email yourself the PowerPoint this time?
That's important to me too. I like when stories give you the idea that there's a world that exists beyond what you're being told, because I think that's very human. That's very normal, right? People kind of ribbing each other for these little inside jokes. So the idea that here's a professor who goes around and gives these lectures, but one time just had an airhead moment and didn't remember to send himself the PowerPoint, and that absolutely feels like the type of nonsense that certainly in my family, we would never let anybody else live down, so I liked including that there. It felt very... It added to that being alive sense. It's been humbling getting used to this new writing format, because I've been writing prose all my life, pretty much. So I've written some poetry, mostly because of requirements for some of my undergraduate classes and degrees. I say as if I have multiple. I almost had a minor in English or creative writing, and then that didn't work out. But initially, there were some screenwriting courses that I had planned to take, but then when I ended up having to drop that minor, I didn't end up taking any. So I've never had any experience writing scripts before. I'm rambling. Anyway, I had a couple of math teachers in, I think it was high school, who had very passionate opposite opinions about that zero debate. So that's a little nod to that. A lot of this story, a lot of the kind of needless details about the town and the university, that's all me just poking on my own hometown. And yeah, once again, I don't remember what I was saying. Yeah, I keep getting distracted by the acting and the it's really hard actually to talk while
the class.
you're listening to audio. It's really tough, turns out.
He threw me a bottle of Advil.
Nice catch.
Thanks. I popped a few, and as I went to set the bottle down, I noticed a small digital recorder laying at the top of the trash can Dad had balanced precariously over his
Here we go,
office
the
table.
digital recorder. So this is the first example of why it's important to plot ahead when you're outlining a story, to make sure you got all your little details correct. Initially, I had this written as just the old school mini cassettes.
Probably means I'm wearing concrete shoes at the bottom of the harbor.
Side note, I love Chris's job here as like a hard-boiled detective. It reminds me very much of
I gotta get to Cheryl before his
the audiobook that I've been listening to that I based this off of, which was it was a series by Black Mask, which has a couple of free, if you have the Audible Premium subscription, has a few collections of old school hard-boiled detective stories up, and I've been listening to them, and I threw that in there as a nod to that. Anyway, as I was saying, the recorder here, the audio recorder, was very important to have it be the more advanced one that allows for a longer period of tapes than tapes do, because the mini cassettes,
The tapes only lasted about 30 minutes on each side.
as you said, about 30 minutes on each side, and that would not work for
A 64 or a 128
what ends up happening with this story, that we need that tape recorder to be recording for
Use it to record my
like
lectures.
hours on end.
Here.
Which actually, I have a little tape recorder that I was basing it off of. I'm looking at it here, and I did use it to record lectures when I was in my undergrad university. So it's an old Olympus digital voice recorder,
He didn't dignify the barb with a response.
which is a really good little feller. I actually used this to record a couple of my first auditions when I was first getting into voiceover, which is embarrassing looking back on it, but the fact that I was able to clean it up at all and get that, get a couple of parts with it is kind of astounding for such a dinky little thing that I think I got for like $30 on like a back to school sale.
I used to live here, remember?
Yeah, so when I'm going to be putting together the Foley for the next set of chapters, and we're dealing with some of the
I love you too, Dad.
bits where it's recorded from an old recorder, that is my plan to use it. So you'll keep an ear out for that, and you'll hear it.
Shit. Overslept.
A lot of the Foley that you heard in that scene, I did myself too, throwing the bottle of Advil up in the air and catching it, throwing my keys onto the counter and grabbing them off, stuff like that. All of the sound effects of the strip mall and of driving. Again, I just stuck my Zoom recorder in my cup holder as I was driving around town one day and sat outside one of my local like strip malls to get the sound of like foot traffic and a busy highway nearby. There we go, there's the next Easter egg. That's Apex Shadow, Joe, who's gonna show up later in this scene as Jimmy Masterson. Yeah, so that's Joseph Boslinski, and he has an absolutely phenomenal production that's actually playing under this part here. That's one of the most recently published, as of the time of my recording this, episodes of his series Apex Shadow. Definitely check that out over on Valiant Productions. Love you, Joe. I think that storytelling is something that humans just need to do, specifically creatives. So it's so fun seeing different projects kind of trade out people and swap out, and oh, now so-and-so's directing in this, and oh, he's voicing a part in this, and oh, in this thing he's one of the editors, and I don't know, it's been a really fun peek behind the curtain. So this is all kind of a product of the fact that when I made that deal with myself to have the next idea I came up with be a comedy regardless of what the subject matter was, and then ending up coming up with basically like a Dean Koontz or Stephen King style plot, there are moments where you can't avoid being serious, right? But what I've been pitching it as is sort of like if Monty Python or Douglas Adams wrote a paranormal thriller in the vein of a Stephen King or a Dean Koontz, which are some huge names to compare myself to. So maybe that's an argument for some narcissism, but I hope I'm doing a good job with that balance. It's been a lot of fun to tinker with. It reminds me a lot of the other book that I was really inspired by, which was Daniel Rigby's audiobook up on Audible that's called, I believe, Isaac Steele and the Forever Man, which is another phenomenal production that I recommend everybody checking out, especially if you like what you're hearing so far.
Regarded me with a weary nod as I came up behind him.
Hugo, I'd say good morning, but nothing's
And I
gonna
appreciate
prevent
this.
us from
Cliff Jones and Rachel Schumacher, who are playing Sean and Elaine McGuire, they each came to me and said, "Hey, can I do an accent for this part?" I didn't ask them to do it. It's it's neither of their native accents, but
I turned to where he had
that just proves some of the excitement and fun that some of these actors, who were even playing like really small parts, still wanted to bring to this production, and I am endlessly thankful for them.
They both turned as I came over.
Huey?
And this is Kat Loveland. She plays the adult Jackie Adler, and she's, I believe she's a writer herself. She also is somewhat new to audio engineering, so definitely check out some of her other projects.
Right.
The interesting thing about Jackie is getting that right mix of somebody who is snarky, who has a little bit of a bite to it, but can also really display a lot of empathy. That's something that I worked closely with Kat a few times to make sure that we got that right mix so that this exact interaction and interactions like it that require her to bring out some of that empathetic side sound good, sound realistic for both that type of profession and this type of character.
I didn't mean to suggest otherwise.
She looked back to me.
One of my students was involved.
There's a bit of a joke here that nobody is quite certain what Jackie's profession is, whether she's a counselor or a therapist or a social worker. That's kind of an in-joke between my friends and I who went to the same master's program, because when you're on the outside of it, all three of those things look really similar, and a lot of times you can apply for the same position with any of those backgrounds. But when you're in the industry, they make a big stink about making sure that say you're the correct thing that you went to school for. So, for example, myself, I went to school for clinical counseling, so I am technically a counselor. That being said, I currently work as an outpatient therapist at a community mental health agency, so perfect example of the way that kind of from the outside looking in, people really can't tell the difference between the three of us.
Her eyes shifting briefly to the patrol car behind her, and shook her head and went
Yeah,
off
this
into
scene
the
was
dark,
just
talking to off-roaders.
wild
I
to
watched her
to
go.
produce, just getting all of the different elements, all of the different actors to vibe, to sound like they were in the same location, getting just enough of the background walla and sound effects to give the sense of being outside where there was this crime scene and a lot going on and some destruction, without painting myself into a corner where then for the rest of the series, there's now the expectation that every little sound is going to be accounted for. So that was a fun challenge, and a good example of that would be the Daniel Rigby book, where he is very selective about which things get the sound effect, the sound of the laser or a door opening, which voices get kind of overproduced, and so it's an interesting challenge that I've never had to deal with just writing, where you just put narration in there and hand it off to the readers, and Mazel tov, good luck. So
New horizons. Out on the edge of town, the industrial park had been converted into a clean and beautiful campus, and the photos that started showing up by checkout counters around town all had it looking like the sort of deluxe rehab centers celebrities and millionaires out in California would go to. Their methods were a heavily guarded trade secret, but nobody could argue with their results. The kids sent
yeah, and this is sort of where the satire of the series comes in, with this idea that and a lot of my friends who are in the field will probably recognize this, in that a lot of parents, they really expect that like an intensive inpatient or even intensive outpatient program is going to kind of do the work for them of rehabilitating their kids. And the fact of the matter is just that that's not how that works. Specifically with youths, so much of their lives are impacted by the adults and their family structures and systems, that it's really unrealistic to expect that a 1 or 2 week program is going to boom, fix everything for them. And even if it does give them a good jump start into recovery, that's not going to be something that can take place without parental involvement. And that's sort of what this series, and specifically EOS Behavioral Health, is poking fun at, is pointing out. If you want your kids to just come back as perfect little, what's the term that I use? Like robots in skin suits or something like that.
Perfect timing.
Yeah, something shady would have to would have to be going on behind those closed doors to get that kind of result at that little effort, or at that little involvement. That's not even saying that those are bad parents who have that idea in their head. It's just an unrealistic expectation, and it gets echoed later in the story. There's a monologue Jackie has, and this isn't ruining anything. Like, this isn't a spoiler, where she's just kind of bitching about exactly that's just not how therapy works, unfortunately.
Adler.
Not how good therapy, good moral therapy works.
It was good seeing you, Huey. Take care.
You too, Jackie. She walked off, and I glared at the ground like it owed me money.
That's another quip I
Something
just
wasn't adding
loved.
up here. Jackie was right. The number of broken bottles all around would have suggested a small horde of culprits, not two recently committed teenagers who probably had a tolerance the size of a thimble piece in Monopoly.
Oh, thank you, Chris, for your sacrifice and your lower blood oxygen level anytime you're reading for me.
Drunk teens are opposed to a little rampant destruction on somebody else's dollar, but it didn't seem right here. For one thing, the parking lot didn't smell like alcohol.
This was me trying to add some of that classic hard-boiled detective, just common sense stuff to give our main character Hugo here a bit of an inkling that something's up, you know.
There was a sound behind me that I could only describe as that of 100 cats all throwing up simultaneously.
I tried to come up with the most awful sound I could think of, and that was what I had.
A sort of nasally, little pompous voice that gives the impression the owner was a personal trainer who thought too highly of himself, but those two definitions are sort of the same thing when you really think about it.
All my love to the various personal trainers out there in the world. You're phenomenal. I'm sorry for kind of making fun of you, but we all know at least one person who is a little too into themselves in that profession, don't we? And there he is, the man with the plan, Joe Boslinski himself. He had so much fun with this part, or at least I hope he did. I actually offered him a couple of different roles, and I said, you pick which one you want to do. And Jimmy was actually the most work that it was going to require from him, and I warned him of that. And he got back to me, and he was like, yeah, I gotta do it, how could I not? Sent me the audio, I think, like, the next day or something, and just did a great job. There's one point that I actually feel bad that I have to have Chris talking over it, but I told him that it's, this is going to be playing in the background, and, you can ad-lib if you want. And he did an amazing, like, 30-second speech that's phenomenal. So on your next listen through of this, try to hone into Joe's voice, crank up the dial and listen, because it's, oh my god, it's so funny. It's that perfect amount of, like, douchey arrogance that we needed for this character, which really plays against Joe's part in certainly his own project Apex, where, spoiler, he's actually playing a social worker, so.
Yeah, I should mention that there are a few points throughout the scripts where I've let the actors ad-lib a bit, and they've all managed to come up with something phenomenal and funny in each instance, so love that. Love an energized cast.
Yeah, and that line there about dating and then having to, like, be on speaking terms with people, that's just, like, one of those things you have to deal with if you grow up in a small town and stay in the area. Yeah, and fun fact, I think that little cough that she gave is actually from a completely unrelated part of the script. I'm not even sure she meant to keep it in the audio she sent me. I just, I needed something there when I added the hug sound effect, and that was perfect, so. Thanks, Kat.
Very sorry about what happened. And look, we want to make it up to you. See, these kids, they just having a bit of trouble adjusting to the New Horizons method, and
Yeah, here we got that thing where, like a corporation starts using all these buzzwords to try to cover up their shady shit.
Just offer us the hush money already and shut your mouth, would you?
Cliff did a great read of that line there where he's like, all right, cutting through the crap. Here we go. Yeah, that's one of those, like, kind of old white guy privileges where you can just call people out on their bullshit.
If you two could just avoid any mention of the center when the news crews rock up here, yeah? I mean, we do a lot of good work for this community, right? And it would be a shame, just a real shame, if this little incident were...
I just love his read here.
We're hearing about our wonderful organization. You get what I'm saying?
Shit.
Yeah, here we go. So, when you listen to it again, pick around the 31-minute mark and crank up the sound to give a listen to to Joe's phenomenal ad-lib there. It actually, I did have to cut it in half and put it as bookends on either side of Chris's narration here. But it comes back in and it picks right back up where it left off. I didn't cut anything out. Yeah, so then Devin, who plays Dax, who doesn't appear in this episode yet, just gets referenced. I reached out to them kind of in advance, like, hey, I've got a part that I'm picturing you playing, but let me know if, you're too busy right now to accept another project. And they graciously said, yeah, as soon as you have information, let me know. So I actually sent them the first script, just like, hey, just so you know, this is what's going down. This is what you'd be signing up for. And I think they got back to me like that night, and they were like, yeah, this is this is up my alley. Sign me up. So keep an ear out for that in episode 2. Dax is a character who I have a soft spot for, and Devin is another person who I've worked with for a couple different projects who I really love their energy, and it's been a joy to direct and write for them.
Ain't that right, Mr. and Mrs. M?
I could use some help cleaning up and finding something to cover that window. When the snow starts over the weekend, it'll ruin the carpet if we don't find something to...
Whoa, hey, say less. I'll have some of the center staff come
Oh,
down
say
and
less.
you
As I was writing that line, I was thinking like, oh, am I dating myself? Is that line already on the outs? Do people still say that anymore? I feel like that was the type of shit everybody was saying in 2020, and but then again, isn't that just the perfect thing for like a 30-something-year-old personal trainer who like thinks he's cool, and it's like, nah, buddy, that's like 5 years out of date already.
Told me to kick rocks now, I'd be freezed out, no question. One thing school never quite managed to teach me was how to keep my nose out of business that wasn't mine. But that same nose was telling me that something here stunk to high heaven.
That was important to me also, to try to get across the idea that Hugo is, he's got a good heart, but he maybe just kind of wants to know what's going on. He's a little gossipy, and that ends up being both his vice.
Bad idea. You know, the kind I'm good for.
I love that line, bookending it back to that opening monologue. The idea that this is a kid who kind of knows he shouldn't be looking into this shit, but like can't help himself. And I felt like we hinted at that with the fact that he dragged Jackie into it in the first place back in the opening in scene 1, that flashback.
Oh, and I should mention Christopher Z, who plays the young Hugo back in that opening scene. He also works on a few other projects. He is on the YouTube channel Audio Anomaly, as well as his own page, Christopher Z, and he also does some work with the audio engineering on Apex Shadow, so definitely check him out on those platforms. He's phenomenal.
Yeah, I do think it's funny that I keep shouting out all of these various other productions as if as if my YouTube channel doesn't have like 20 followers, 18 of which are probably the actual actors that I've got in this. Oh, I think here it is. Here it is, my favorite line. I love that. I've peaked. I will never write another line more perfect than that. I think in part because I don't really write raunchy humor, so it just kind of...
I forgot about that.
That's as intense as it's going to get on this show. We're not going to get too explicit, but I hope I caught a few people off guard, particularly people who know me, who know I would never say that, but absolutely would write it.
Completely forgotten. I'm house sitting for my dad while he's out of town. Not a lie. I had forgotten that part, but
That was a tough thing, figuring out how to separate the narration from the dialogue, and I actually did that by adding I think it was a lo-fi filter over all of the narration tracks. So that's a motif that's going to come up in some of the other editing that I'm going to keep up with all of the narration, because pretty much each episode is going to have a primary narrator. We're going to get little bits from other people here and there in everything but this first episode. But I was given some advice, I think by Bone, about making sure that the audience can differentiate, because obviously they don't have any visual cues, it's all just audio. And I think this did a really solid job of not changing the voice too much, so that you wouldn't even notice on a conscious level what the difference is. So it maintains the essence of the voice, where it's still very clearly the same actor, but it does give that slight variation that helps tip you off to which things are being spoken and which things we're just hearing as kind of dipping into the first person narration. I actually ended up asking Chris to re-record that line and give me a few different options, and then ended up going back and using the original line he sent me, so sorry, Chris. And fun fact, the person who opened, who read the chapter 1 and who's now reading the credits, that's my mom. So she's reading, she's our series narrator, and playing over again that phenomenal score by Octavian. This whole project is going to be a lesson for me in kind of learning to let go. I constantly tell people that I think it's important to trust your audience, and when I say that, I generally mean kind of leaving clues for readers to pick up on, and assuming that they don't need to have their hands held. That being said, I think I am a little bit of a control freak, so that's that type A personality. That it's been a challenge to not over-direct or put too many effects and inflection notes into the scripts, and just trust the people who I've cast, that they've got the passion and the know-how and the skills to give this story a voice. And I know I sound like a broken record, but I am so thankful for the crew that I've got moving forward with this project with me, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm really, really looking forward to seeing how this shakes out, seeing what we make. So yeah, I think I managed it this time. Some director's commentary. So thanks everybody for tuning in, and hope to see you for chapter 2.